All right, welcome back. It's another open office this Wednesday. Excited about this one to talk a lot about Twitter and the things that I've been learning on Twitter. Other than that conversation, I have one primary goal, and that is to not sneeze while on this live stream. If you recall from last week, I mentioned my son has COVID, and fortunately, all of my tests so far have come back negative, but I do have something, and I've been sneezing a lot lately. So if I have to pause a moment, that's probably what I'm doing. So, welcome. Like I said, we're going to be talking a little bit about Twitter today. And while we're going through that, if you have any other questions that are about machine learning, business model innovation, ballet, or whatever you want to talk about, just drop a comment either in, we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I can see all those comments. We can have a conversation. We can bring up topics. Yeah, whatever you'd like to talk about. That's why it's called an open office. But let's dig into Twitter for now. So I have had a Twitter account for a long time, but I have not used it very extensively until recently. Let's see here. Yeah, I had it since 2009. 2009 and 780 tweets. Pretty sure most of those happened either a long time ago or more recently. But the short thing of why I'm taking a look at Twitter a lot more recently is I started finding a lot of very interesting voices on Twitter that helped me learn how to do things that were important for my business. Most specifically, Facebook advertising for the ballet company. Um, I'm an engineer by trade. I have not done much in the way of marketing. And so figuring out how to put together a paid ad campaign was something that I just kind of shot from the hip, right? Like made it all up as I went. And we saw some success overall enough to keep doing Facebook advertising, but I knew we could do a better job. So I don't know. Let's see here. Yeah, top one right here. Charlie T is a guy that I've been following quite a bit. He has a lot to say about how to optimize your Facebook advertisements. Very responsive. I've sent him a number of direct messages and comments on his posts, and he's quite responsive and really like his approach. It's very founded in the type of stuff that I would expect from my machine learning background, right? His basic premise is let the machine learning algorithms of Facebook do the work for you. Help those algorithms get the best chance at succeeding as you can. And the way he approaches it seems very very, very in line with what I've experienced in practicing machine learning. And Jason, yeah, Twitter's been great for Speak to Web as well. I have not seen Speak to Web on Twitter, so maybe I'll have to see if I can find that at some point here in the stream. Oh no, puppy in the water. Yeah, so I've been learning a lot about Facebook advertising. I've been learning a lot about SEO. I've been trying to pull in like all these different ideas that I have going on in my head. I've been able to find very knowledgeable people on Twitter who are talking about this stuff on a day-to-day basis. Now, here's what I really like about Twitter and learning things for your business or just out of your own interest, I guess, is you get the same problem as every other social media platform, where the more disparate topics that you try to bring into your feed, the messier this feed gets. And you have to start digging through all kinds of stuff to find the things that you're actually interested in. Perhaps there's ways to solve this on other platforms. The way that it works really well on Twitter is using lists. So you can see here, I have a number of different lists. The lock here indicates that I have it private. So you can actually share lists that you create publicly where you've you say these are counts. It's like a curated feed, right? A self-curated feed where you say, I want these users to appear on this list, this feed. And I've kept all mine private because I don't really have an interest in sharing them. I could share them if people are interested. But I've got one for additive manufacturing. I've got a lot of cool ideas in that space. Of course, AI, machine learning stuff. That's my bread and butter. So I have a list for that. Same thing for ballet, for Deos Contemporary Ballet. It helps me stay abreast on the things that are happening in the ballet world. Business model innovation. I told you I was doing a lot on marketing, and video on demand is another interest I've got some ideas in. So yeah, what's really cool is instead of having this really highly mixed feed, you can make lists that essentially give you a targeted feed that you can curate yourself and have it be on a certain topic. Because that's one of the things that I've really struggled with on social media is the things that I'm involved with are very, very different from each other. I mean, machine learning and ballet, how more different can you get? And so it's really hard for me to just have a consistent feed or to put out stuff in a consistent way. So this has been particularly helpful for me in organizing and finding topics and being able to dive into a topic as I'm planning to use it, instead of saying, all right, I'm going to read up on some marketing stuff and then scrolling through the 1 out of 10 tweets about marketing. I can just dive right into a marketing heavy page where it's all stuff from Charlie T, Justin Borge, Dennis Yu, all these people that I've found giving out really, really good tips. One thing that I have not used Twitter for yet is advertising. So I don't know how the advertising platform works on Twitter. It's something I'm probably going to be taking a look at soon just to play with it and experiment a bit. But one thing that I am definitely experimenting with right now is I've had plenty of time working with startups and business model innovation, right? So business model innovation being, let's take your idea, let's take all the information that you know about how you want to run your business, and let's get really creative and see if there's slight adjustments or major adjustments to how the business model works to find a way to either faster profitability, more scale, what have you. So I've been interested in making some of that content and sharing that knowledge that I've gathered over the years. And so I started making Twitter threads here. I only have one so far on business model patterns. The first one being ingredient branding. And you can see here I have a pattern summary, a prime example. I'm planning to add more tweets to this thread. And that's why I bring up the topic is I get almost intimidated by making a big finished product, right? I would love to be able to just break it down into smaller chunks and work on it more slowly instead of having to put it all together over the span of a week or however long it takes me and then put it out there. I like a lot of feedback. So what I've found particularly helpful about Twitter threads is you can put out a couple of tweets here, like I know I want to cover the pattern summary, that's almost a given, and an example of where that pattern is used in a sort of ideal way. As I come up with more ideas or find out what other people find helpful or what other questions are coming up about this business model, I can just tag them on as a continuation of this thread. And then eventually, with all of this content, I can put that into a much longer blog post or something of that nature. So that's that sort of bottom-up content creation. So none of this stuff has made it to my LinkedIn page yet. I'm planning to start it all on the Twitter side, and then as I see what's helpful to other people and what's not, and how I want to structure it, I'm sure this content will migrate its way over to LinkedIn as well. So if you want to get into my business model innovation content, I'd encourage you to take a look at my Twitter account. You can see my handle right here, AJ Hoekst, Hoekst, or you can just search for my name, Point Vector, Deos Ballet. I'm sure using those search terms, I'll pop up a little bit pretty easily. So yeah, I'm planning on trying to figure out what my next business model patterns are on Twitter. Like I said, I've done the ingredient branding one, which there's an example here that I use Teflon, right? So that's a chemical from DuPont, and all these frying pans and cookware stuff use Teflon in their product, or at least used to, and that was part of their branding. And so they leveraged the brand values of Teflon to accentuate their brand. There's a ton of other patterns out there. One of them that I'm looking at maybe doing next is the Orchestrator. Shoot, that's kind of hard to see. Orchestrator Pattern. This one actually came into play yesterday when I was working with another company who had quite a wide variety of steps in the value chain that they were working on. And it wasn't quite working out for them. And they're trying to evaluate, okay, how do we move forward, because we're bleeding cash and we got to figure out how do we keep this thing alive. And the Orchestrator pattern came up as a potential solution. And so as a quick summary to how the Orchestrator pattern works, you change the business model to focus on the core competencies in the value chain, the places that you add the most value, and then you outsource the rest and you coordinate it, right? So like the classic example of this would be something like Nike, right? So Nike, they've got a lot of their manufacturing outsourced, or Uber, right? Like they don't even have cars. I mean, maybe they do now with self-driving and whatnot, but they don't have cars. They don't necessarily have drivers unless you're in California and they're considered employees. But I think that's how that legal battle turned out. But they focus on the actual connection piece and the payment piece, right? So they orchestrate all the other components of that value chain, but they really focus their business on certain aspects of it. So there's an opportunity for this business to say, hey, you know what? We do these 10 steps. Let's focus on the last 2 where we have the most knowledge, we provide the most value, and let's share the rest of those steps with our partners and help them coordinate it, because we're really good at coordinating all 10 steps too. So yeah, that's a really interesting pattern that I'd love to dive into. There's another one, experience selling. This one, I like this one too. There was actually, I'm glad I brought this up. There was a Twitter thread that I saw maybe it was a month ago or so. Somebody did a big deep dive on Red Bull and what their business is like. And I was shocked because, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but they're essentially just a marketing company. I have to find the Twitter thread, but there was almost the implication that like the actual product itself isn't special, and they might not even really make it. They might outsource the manufacture of it. Don't quote me on that. I got to find the Twitter thread, but they don't necessarily sell Red Bull, the energy drink. They sell a whole experience around the product. So that's just a really interesting way. Another classic example that you can see on these cards here. This is from St. Gallen's. By the way, this is their business model navigator cards. The other example they have on here is Starbucks, right? Like you can get your coffee anywhere, probably cheaper. I make my own coffee now because, yeah, it's cheaper and I don't have to drive anywhere. But part of the sell for Starbucks was the whole experience of the coffee shop and everything that they bring into the business. So experience selling is another really interesting one that I think I might do relatively soon. So yeah, I don't. It's likely that not anybody is particularly familiar with all these business model patterns, so I can't really ask you which one would you like me to do next. However, what I could do is whatever business you have, it'd be really interesting to have a brief conversation, and we could take a look at what business model patterns you're using and maybe even go through a quick 5-minute ideation period of like, hey, here's a couple of other interesting business models within your industry that maybe will shake up some ideas for you. So anyway, I'm getting a little bit away from Twitter here, which was the intent of this talk or this open office. So I'll swing back to that because I'm now realizing as I was showing you things like this, probably should have done it like this because now you can actually read it. Well, you live and you learn. So heading back to Twitter here, we talked a little bit about lists. I've used it to learn a lot about Facebook advertising and just content writing in general. What I had mentioned earlier about how I'm using this actually came from an idea from Tina Donati. Don't know how to say her last name. So in 2020, when I first started doing live streams, before doing the live streams, I think it was about halfway through the year, I was trying to make some content around machine learning, and I would spend hours just trying to put together a presentation or a big long document, like a big article. And this is where I was saying earlier, I'm sort of intimidated by making these big packages of content because I don't know, that's just not how I work. I'm a much more conversational person. And so I turned to live streaming because I could have conversations and just talk naturally. And then I would cut up the videos to relevant sections and share those as smaller content. So the idea there was start with something big. And for me, that was live streaming, the most time effective way to make a lot of content, and then start breaking it down to smaller and smaller pieces. So maybe I'd do an hour long or 45-minute long live stream that I would end up getting 3 to 5 sort of small 2-minute videos out of that I could post. And then I could take those 2 to 3 minute videos and then break that down even farther and then turn each of those videos into 5 or 6 small LinkedIn posts or Twitter posts or tweets. So that's that sort of large content, breaking it down to smaller pieces. And that worked pretty well. It was very time consuming. Even though I sort of optimized around my time on it, just because you have to pick a topic that people care about. And that takes a lot of time and thought. And then I came across this tweet from Tina where she says, yeah, you can do that, but you can also go backwards, right? So start with a Twitter thread, hence the business model pattern. And then as you add to that content, and maybe you get questions, comments, and whatever on that thread, you can start wrapping that all into a larger article. And then once you have an article or two around a similar topic, start using that to make a podcast, right? Or live stream or what have you. So that's going from small to big. And I was surprised that had never crossed my mind. As you can see here, I'm like, hey, now that you said it, it seems like a much better way. I really like that approach because I'm going to turn this into a machine learning sort of analogy here. There's this constant trade-off that we talk about in engineering, exploration versus exploitation. And this is in reference to optimization problems, right? So how do you optimally do something? And I'm going to drop Twitter out of here for a little bit while I chat about this. So whenever you're trying to optimize something, you have to balance how much are you going to leverage what currently works, right? Exploiting, the existing solution, the best way that's currently known, versus exploring new ways of doing it or new approaches. You can pick one or the other exclusively, and you'll find out that eventually you're not going to make it because you have to do some exploration, but you can't just explore all the time. You have to at some point sit down and just put rubber to the road and start working on something consistently. So how do you trade off those two? And so I'm bringing this up because when she brought up this approach from going small content and aggregating into a much bigger thing over time, it seemed like that's the exploration side. It's very low effort to put out a whole bunch of different ideas, see what sticks, see what people engage with, and then slowly build up that content, very explorative, versus the exploitation where there's a topic that people are interested in, or you have a lot of content or expertise around it. And so you can make long form content very easily, and then break it down, right? So that's the exploitation side. So I think anyone who's trying to use content marketing for their small business needs to perhaps consider how you want to trade off both sides of that, right? Like there are some things that that work because you've been running your business for a while. Start with the long form content on that and start breaking it down so you've got lots of micro content that comes out of that larger content. But exploration is really important too. So you can also start with small ideas, right? That maybe could be game changers for your business or a different avenue, or, you're going after a different business model, right? So starting to talk about maybe doing things a certain way to see if the market's interested in it. You can start that on that side with the micro content. And as people have interest, start growing it up into larger and larger forms of content. What I also like about that is you can use that in Facebook advertising, right? Where you take a whole bunch of different ideas that you have for content and put them under a Facebook advertising campaign and see where Facebook spends the money, right? Where it sees that content being most successful and accepted by the market. And that might be a really good way to test out some really a wide variety of ideas quickly. So I started making a visualization for this, which I'll pull up on the screen here. I didn't get very far. Sort of ran out of time. This is that it's big to small, oh shoot, that's kind of hard to see. Let me make this larger. So yeah, you've got your big content, blog, live stream, long article, breaking it down to blog post, newsletter, into tweets. You can also do it where's my mouse? The other way, right? Oh shoot, duplicate, boom, there we go. Nope. This is a program called Draw.io. It's free, so you don't have to buy Visio. I view this as a free Visio. It's also great for mind mapping if you're into that. So here's the sort of small to large approach. And I think if you're going to be creating business, you should definitely consider working on both ends of it. And I have a growing theory here on that I'm testing out. Where in machine learning, one really, really great way to optimize the balance between exploration versus exploitation is the multi-armed bandit is what the algorithm's called. It's worth a Google, but in short, it frames the problem as there's a lot of ways to describe it, but one of the ways is going up to a lottery machine, right? So you pull the lever, and not every time, but sometimes you get a reward for pulling that lever, and you have multiple levers to choose from. And so what you need to determine is your policy, right? Your strategy of which levers you're going to pull and when. And so pulling a lever in this case would look like time spent creating content. And your two levers would be these policies, right? Going from large to small or small to large. Which one's optimal? It depends on the reward that you get out of the slot machine, if you will. And so how you measure that is going to have a big impact. That might be engagement, right? Do you get more engagement on one strategy versus the other strategy? If you have a great pipeline where people are actually turning that engagement into dollars for your business, right? Like somebody shows up for a haircut or a massage, or, you know, they sign up for your seminar and they pay the fee or whatever. You could have the dollar bills be your measure of the reward that you get out of that strategy. And so there's a lot of really complicated ways you can try to optimize how you pull those two levers, but a really good naive approximation to the optimal solution is to say, let's say 10% of the time is going to be our threshold. So 10% of the time, you're going to pick a random lever. It doesn't matter, right? There's no thought behind it. It's just 10% of the time, you're going to flip a coin. Heads means big to small. Tails means small to big, right? The other 90% of the time, you're going to look at which one of these strategies, which of these policies is currently the best strategy, the best policy. And so the other 90% of the time, that's what you're going to do. So it is not truly an optimal solution to that problem, but it's really hard to get truly optimal solutions in business. They're usually too time-consuming, complex, expensive. And so these sort of naive approximations to the solutions often do much better in return for the business. So that's one way you can do it. An enhancement on that approach would be what's called the decreasing epsilon. So epsilon is that threshold I mentioned, 10%. Early on, when you first start doing this, trying to pick how much you pull each lever, each strategy, it's likely that you want to be highly explorative at first, right? And then after a while, you don't want to have to keep exploring as much. And so what you do is you start with maybe a 90% threshold, epsilon at 90%, and every month or every week or quarter or whatever your cadence is, you drop that 10% over time until it reaches down to 10%. So that's often an improvement on the naive approach of just picking a threshold, where the improvement being starting at a very high epsilon and then reducing it over time. I'm going to be experimenting with that myself. And using measurement on my social media profiles, being engagement and the input, the actual pulling the lever, tracking Pomodoros, which is a whole nother thing we can talk about, time boxing, limiting your time on something instead of just letting yourself work for hours and hours like I'm prone to. Anyway, how you might use this in business, there's actually plenty of personalization algorithms that you can get through. Microsoft Azure has a service for this, where maybe your website has a whole bunch of different articles, and you have this back-end service that says, okay, if somebody views my web page, I can just have the latest 5 articles that our team's written show up on the website. But what if that's not the right content for that user, right? Or an e-commerce, right? Somebody visits your website. If there's data that can indicate to you that they're interested in buying a pair of pants, right? You don't want to show them a whole bunch of shirts or sweaters, right? You'd love it if the products that get highlighted on the page that they land on would be pants and stuff, right? And so that's where the levers being pulled would be things like, there's a lever for each of your products, and the algorithm figures out, okay, given the characteristics of this user, let's come up with an optimal policy to figure out which levers, which content should we show that over time And on average, we're going to be showing everybody the content that is most personalized to them. You can see this in retention as well. So for businesses that have like subscriptions, I mean, there's all kinds of things like Blue Apron or what's that one for tailored clothing? Stitch Fix. In fact, I'm pretty sure Stitch Fix does this, the contextual bandit for their policy. So they'll have a policy for retention where it's like, hey, if somebody hasn't ordered in a while, or they haven't, or they've recently canceled their subscription, we could do a couple of different things. One, we can just ignore it and do nothing because that's free and they might sign up again later anyway. We could also, as a different policy, offer them a discount, or we could do some other offer to try to re-engage them, right? So we'll just pretend there's 3 levers. They'll use the contextual bandit there to say, let's 10% of the time just pick a random one so we figure out what on average works best. And then the 90% of the time, other time, we'll use that best strategy given the context of who the particular user is. So this is a strategy that's used a lot in machine learning to balance exploration versus exploitation and for optimization problems. So again, I'm finding myself getting away from Twitter a bit here, which is probably okay. But the seed of that whole conversation, that tangent, I am the king of tangents, was this idea that you can work backwards on your content as well. So yes, if you're interested in following some of the content that I'm making around business model patterns, I'll probably be doing other content on machine learning on here too, but the business model pattern stuff is going to be on Twitter for now. Like I said earlier, take a look at AJ Hoekst, AJ Hoekst. Last name's Hoekstra. You can find me on Twitter and let me know what you think about the business model patterns. I'd love some feedback to figure out what people find most useful. So you can do that. And yes, as for next week, let's see here. How close are we to Christmas? A couple weeks out. I'm not really sure what the content will be next week. It might be a continuation of business model patterns, or maybe I'm going to dive a little bit more into a more coherent description of contextual bandits and how they might be used in various aspects of business. But yeah, thanks so much for joining in. I hope that there's some amount of value that you got out of this, and I'll see you all next week. Have a good one.